Okay, I think we are ready. Well, good evening and welcome, everyone. Before we begin the proceedings of our Finance Committee meeting, I need to highlight safety protocols and expectations. If you are fully vaccinated and you do not need to wear a mask, is that correct?
No, it's not.
I think esto está mal. You do need to wear a mask. Due to CDC guidance placing Kent County in the substantial risk category for transmission of COVID-19 Delta variant, we are requiring masks indoors for everyone on the grounds of GRPS property for all students, staff, visitors, regardless of vaccination status. That sounds correct. If you need a mask, they are available at the entrances. Public comment cards and meeting agendas are located on the tables within the board chambers at both entrances. Once you fill out a comment card, please submit this in the drop box next to the comment cards. Our board assistant will collect these cards when I call for public comment and deliver them to our board secretary, Ms. Lewis.
The rest
At
of
least
that's not as valid. Yep.
I'll call on each individual one at a time to address the board at the presentation table. On behalf of our superintendent, Dr. Henry Roby, and the Board of Education, thank you for being here in attendance with us. All right. And so are we ready to begin, sir? There are no public comments that I can see. Okay. And so Larry, if you can begin.
I will. Gosh, now it's evening. Good evening. Matthias, and again, Finance Committee members. The first on the action item agenda is the purchasing agenda, and I've got it up on the screen there. Just a few comments on that. First was a modification of a blanket for West Michigan Janitorial, which provides recess aids for elementary. That's a combination of, frankly, the initial blanket was too low, and we continue to struggle on getting people, and the costs have gone up.
So we're using janitorial services to staff recess?
To recess aids, yes, and as well as some food service aids in the individual buildings. It's all hands on deck, quite frankly.
No, right,
Yeah,
yeah.
we've
Because
got-
I've heard people complain about not having research.
Well, it's
recess.
still a challenge, even with.
And so that's a way to do it is.
Yeah. So, the special election number 2 there for our millage increase. Now, on support materials, when Reverend Matthias and I spoke about this last week, he asked about number 3 there, Jeff Montgomery, as contracted psychologist. We continue to experience shortages in that arena also. We have used Dr. Montgomery several times in the past. He knows our students, works well with our students. To clarify, if you're Reverend Matisse and the rest of the committee, this is to assist with IEP reevaluations. Is that the correct terminology? So would not be the initial ones, but it's help with the reevaluations. And upon approval by the board, he will begin immediately. He can do that. So they may recall a couple months ago, we brought the at least part of our snow plowing contract, and at that time I mentioned we were short 4 of our sectors. We went out and called some other smaller and other providers of service, reposted it on a individual building basis for those buildings where we did not have bids, and that worked. And so we were able to add 2 more, Kenway Hills and Lavelle's. I believe Lavelle's Lawn Care is a minority-owned organization that is a new vendor for us. So now, presumably we get snow, we'll be able to clear it from all of our buildings. And then under the support materials there, a couple of, the first is Innovation Central High School. It's a grant that we've had for a couple of years now. And for training services, software package for Alex. That is a project in concert with community college to develop a transitional math program for high school going to college students. It's in process, and that is as you can see, artificial learning assessment tool that will need to be added to that project. It will be funded with ESSER dollars. And that's really it. Nothing in the bond arena at this point in time. So any questions on the purchasing agenda?
I continue to be concerned about GR First, and I know that you're doing your job to get more people involved in bidding. But you know, on the snow plowing, I don't remember what the other. I think it was two other companies. Were they also outside of Grand Rapids or inside of Grand Rapids? Because here you have Kennewa Hills. I'm supposing they're from Kennewa. Lavelle's, I'm not sure if they're Grand Rapids or not.
I believe they're Grand Rapids.
Are they? Thank you. Thank you.
I don't, the other two, I don't think they were. They were some of those larger lawn care type companies outside of it. And, you know, perhaps as we found with these things that, and I think we'll look at this more closely going forward, as we had bid it by sectors, and we've done that historically, from what I understand, and as opposed to individual buildings. Some of those large sectors, some of these smaller ones couldn't handle it for a number of reasons. Certainly this year with everybody, it's a labor. So I'm going to suggest, Dr. Flores, that going forward, we break it down to smaller bites as it relates to this in particular, because we found out we're successful when we broke it down to smaller bites with getting a couple smaller providers and any new minority-owned one.
The thing is you're doing them for 3-year cycles, much like the translation. And then there's even this little small company of MS Rads. You know, I Googled them before I came to the meeting, and they're out in Rockford. And yet I also Googled, T-shirt printing, and there was, anywhere from 10 to 30 companies locally in Grand Rapids. Now, some of them may not deal with printing T-shirts. I don't know. It's a small amount, $27,000. However, $27,000 to a small, minority or woman-owned company is a significant contract. And if they're from Grand Rapids, it adds to the Grand Rapids economy. And that is what I systemically, analyze as we are playing kingmakers, basically, in an economic field where there is opportunity and sometimes limited opportunity. You have people who understand how to do the bidding, how to access contracts in Grand Rapids, who the decision makers are, and then you have those that are not. I can think of a dozen lawn companies. I can think of a dozen people that I know that plow snow, and they're out there, small minority contractors. And just like the PR firms that I talked about, and in PR contracts that we have not bid out. And then the interpreting. There are many companies, and we found that out when we did the bidding. So there needs to be, in my mind, additional efforts to make sure that we're focusing in on Grand Rapids first, and that we're encouraging people from all backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, to participate in this process, if in fact they are to benefit from being part of Grand Rapids and having a significant operation like ours. What was it, $500 million organization? Imagine the money that we oversee and that
I
we
think as
provide
we look-
opportunities for.
As we look forward, we can certainly talk about even hosting an opportunity for these companies for us to see them, for you guys to see them and really see what they have to offer.
And we have, again, we have not done it lately. Certainly in the past year and a half, things have changed, but we dialogue with that. I have a commitment to move forward. One of the challenges we've had as of late is we have a 2-person purchasing group and everything else. So we're developing a job description right now to get additional help in purchasing. So we're able to better formalize some of the things you just talked about, Dr. Flores.
Good.
Part of our
We look
challenge.
forward to that.
I think that one thing that I'm hearing is that we don't really have a GR first policy. We have a bidding bonus for GR companies if they learn
Yeah, it's
to
a big
bid.
discount, right? Yeah.
If they learn to bid. And I think that what Dr. Flores is talking about is the process that we get bids at, which is not, far as I know, we don't have a board policy on how you
On
get,
procurement?
yeah. So, I mean, I think that the T-shirt is a really good example here, or lawn care is a really good example, since we all know people that do T-shirts and lawn care. And so I'm not sure if, and I don't want to be questioning how this work gets done. It could be that 12 T-shirt companies submitted a bid, and given the bid discount, it still ended up going to this organization. And, but if, actually, I mean, when I need lawn care, I post on Facebook and somebody says, hey, this guy did a great job. And so I call that guy up and I get my lawn taken care of. And it's usually my people say, this guy lives in the city. But we don't really, I don't know how we're doing that. I don't know when the board should be saying, this is what we'd like you to do to make sure you get a certain amount of bids. But I do think that we don't have a policy that says the process has to be such, but we clearly have a board that values it, and for lots of reasons. I don't know if you get my
Well, yeah,
gist
but
here.
also understand, as it relates to this purchase order, you're looking at a snapshot. I do know we use a number of T-shirts companies
Right.
over the years. Some are minority and Grand Rapids-based companies.
I got drawers full of Grand Rapids Public School T-shirts.
Well, yeah, I mean, for all kinds of
So, yeah.
different events, as you know.
But I think that to
so.
get to, I mean,
Yeah.
that's why I say this is a good example. I mean, that's what Jose brought up, is that it's a good example to discuss, is how does this happen? And nothing against this company.
No.
Yeah.
And I think, without getting into the weeds, I think we can say, hey, we have serviced, or we have worked with 15 minority companies, or something like that, some general senses of what really the work that you guys are doing and attempting to do to broaden how GRPS does its work, and then broadens how it stimulates economic growth within our boundaries of a district. So
Yeah, as I think about what our work is, I think about the data. So could we see, not in a snapshot of time, but holistically over a year's time, how many individuals took advantage of utilizing the bid discount? What percentage of our businesses we do services with are in the city of Grand Rapids? And do we see growth over time, right? So that's how we could ensure that, right? Something like that. Well, if there's no other questions, I'll motion for approval of the purchasing agenda.
Support.
All right, all in favor, say yes.
Yes.
Aye, yes.
Aye. Okay. Motion carries.
All right, we've got 3 donations that need Finance Committee action on to move up to the full board. The first being Lego Foundation for Discovery Program. You can see the memo there in your packet. For 27 class pack grants, and a little bit of a discussion regarding what that consists of. For STEAM education, there is, I will tell you that that also includes professional development for those teachers. For each teacher, it'll be up to 30 students per teacher to help better train them on how to use a discovery package also. So recommendation from the ED would be to accept these from the Lego Foundation, valued at just over $38,000.
Motion to accept the Lego Foundation gift.
Support.
All right, all in favor, say yes.
Yes.
Okay. And I know, Larry, I had asked you as we talked, a lot of times we'll get these donations and then I like the fact that there's PD attached to that and that it has a greater value than just really teaching them some skills, math skills, and those other things that we want to help them be ready for college and those other advanced math opportunities. So thank you.
Thank you. The second one there is interface donation, called Smith System Tables. Now, I think maybe we've discussed this before you may be aware of this, but there, as it relates to our testing, there are specific parameters around the tables we have to use. And we have, even though we have tables in the districts, seem to always have a shortage of the approved tables, if you will. So Interface donated or lent us some tables for some testing. It was all said and done. They said, you know what? Why don't you guys just keep them as a donation, which we need. So this is 65 new tables, only been used by us, valued at about $15,275. So again, discussion with Mr. Johnson and Mr. Lewis, the ED of the high schools. This is something we need, and would recommend that the Finance Committee approve it to move to the full board.
Motion to approve the interface donation?
Support?
Great. All in favor say yes.
Yes.
And these tables will be used as needed. So
Yeah, exactly,
So
exactly.
they'll move around the district and.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're being real careful of is Mr. Johnson, as we've had this conversation, is over the years, we've had tables disappear. And we're not really quite sure, but, so there's a higher level of accountability. So ultimately, I think these were at Union High, my recollection is.
Yeah, that's what it
Ultimately,
says.
the union is going to be the owner of the tables per se, and their leadership, they're responsible, working with, of course, with operations to frankly keep track of the tables. And if we have 65 tables today, we better have 65 tables 2 weeks from today, right?
Mhm.
So,
Great.
part of what, I know what's happened from, again, before my time and probably many of yours is there are some situations where we would lend out tables for community events, even private events, and they disappeared, and we have not allowed that for a number of years, and that's helped to a certain extent, so. The last one being a donation of hand sanitizer, valued at just over $2,700. We continue to stock hand sanitizer in all our buildings, and likely will in the, maybe forever, but certainly in the near future. So this is 681 bottles is something we could still use. And so again, discussion with Mr. Johnson, he recommends that we accept this and move it forward to the full board.
Motion to accept the hand sanitizer gift?
Support?
Great. All in favor say yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you. That takes care of the action items. The next section in terms of report, the financial report. Again, the dashboard report through September, so first quarter of our new fiscal year. There's a couple things to point out in the revenue section at the top there. As you can see, for the current year, have not yet received our first state aid payment. That comes this month. Perhaps it's come already. Expenditures are tracking as they are now. We will, as I mentioned in the work session, be working on Amendment 1 to come before this committee in January. As I've also discussed with you a couple weeks ago, we're going to see some increase in the salaries because of what's been happening there, both in the union negotiations as well as the other extra payments we've been talking about. So that's where things stand in terms of a snapshot. Cash and investments still healthy, 31 million. Bond, 198 million. Our bond payments happen in May in November, so you won't see a change in that balance until this report for December. Interim general fund balance at 36 million. Capital expenditures. The reason the year-to-date is a negative 256 is we had some retainage that came back to us as an offset. So we've actually spent, I want to say, neighborhood of $1 million in this current fiscal year, and as you can see, almost $126 million since the bond program began back in 2016. And there's just a snapshot of a head count at the end of September. As you know, we had our first fall count earlier this month. Our student data services folks are working on getting all the other factors in place. I believe the report is due to the state, I want to say November 15th. And at that point, I would suspect we will communicate to the board what that first count is, subject to audit by the ISD later. And I think, as was reported to you and publicly, preliminarily, it's looking better than what we had budgeted for. So it's with a higher foundation allowance, and if we can get more folks, more kids into the buildings, on top of everything else we talked about, the work session, that's provides additional current financing to us going forward. So, and then behind that is some of the details I mentioned for those that, as I mentioned before, for those that like to get into the details. But any questions on the finances so far? And then Long will give a bond construction update. Now, things slowly wind down with the major projects, at least.
But good evening, everyone. Southwest High, we figured out or solved the leak in the men's locker room from this past summer. It turned out to be a caulk joint that we had to tear apart a lot of doors to get to. And then there's now a week.
It's been going on.
And then now there's a leak in the science room that we're trying to figure out. We're trying to, if it's the window above or the roof from 3 stories above, so we're trying to figure that out. We're working out some issues with some VOV units this past summer that we had, and we're down to 3 now that we're just waiting on parts. A lot of the mechanical equipment is long lead time, so we're waiting on those to figure those out. But fortunately, we're past the cooling season, so we'll have it ready for next summer. Union, the project is currently 90% done, still with a completion date of December 2021. We're in the last phase, last portion of the classrooms upstairs and the media center. Most of that's going to be complete around Thanksgiving break, and then the rest, final touch-ups like terrazzo polish in in front of the cafeteria and the corridors, are going to be wrapped up during winter break when there's nobody around, so that we can grind and let it cure. And then that's when the rest of the furniture is going to come to for the rest of the classrooms in the media center. Ottawa's bottom renovation is complete. We did begin the roofing project for both Union and Ottawa Hills. Union's about halfway done right now. In Ottawa, they were going to start last week, but because of some of the rain, it's going to be on as weather permits. Secured entries, we completed the punch list, and we're working through that right now. We're working on card readers and handicap buttons that still need to be complete. Otherwise, all the doors, everything, all the hardware are installed. Innovation Central, Rockford Construction was awarded the project as a CM, and they've been heavily involved since they got awarded the project. They're working out the phasing right now, as the designers are working through design development, which we should have mid-December. So as soon as we get that, we can report a little bit more. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Great. And then this meeting would not be complete without an ESSER update, which, oops, wrong one here. And I included this in your packet, and so I just recall we didn't meet last month, but we continue to spend, certainly the business office and other folks at the district, a lot of time on the ESSER. The ESSER 2 application, the remaining dollars see here the allocation with the top line. $33 million ESSER II. We're in the process of getting the information and completing that application, which we can do at any point in time. And then the ESSER III application opened up maybe about a month ago, and the state of Michigan, I think I mentioned, had been in conversation with the feds about using some of the state's ARP money to provide a minimum per student amount of ESSER funds in the neighborhood of $1,100, and they finally settled with that. So the federal government released the other 1/3 of the ESSER money, and our final allocation, as you can see here, is almost $74 million. You may recall we've been working with a $70 million bogey, so about another $4 million that we will have to get into the application. Now that application, the first round, if you will, is due on December 15th. Internally, we're working to have both the ESSER II and the ESSER III initial application filed before Thanksgiving. And it'll go through the process. Particularly with ESSER III, it's a whole new application, much more involved, much more detailed, requires a number of narratives addressing specific issues. As an example, you may recall 20% of that $74 million has to be reserved for learning loss remediation programs, evidence-based. So one of the narratives we have to author in that application is what we're going to do with that 20%, how we're going to do it, how we're going to share equity, those kinds of things. So we're working on that. We split that up into, again, the team, Rhonda, is working very diligently and still kind of mixing and matching because we still have money available to spend in the ESSER equity and the gear. And then, as I said, ESSER II, obviously. So we will continue to give you updates. The board will continue to get those once a month, more detailed updates by those major spending categories. You can see there the three ESSER categories, our total was about $115 million, about $7,500 per student. But look at the very bottom there. I think this is interesting. Intermediate school wide, over $264 million over the next 3 years to invest into our kids in all the local districts within the ISD, which is a historic investment that we're all going to make. The last column there is that equalization payment. That's what those districts that got one, that's just what I was talking about, where they were initially going to get a lower amount, and we're able to get the equalization payment for a minimum amount per student. But you can also see what some of the other districts are getting. Again, the ESSER allocation is based primarily on, I'm going to call it a Title I student count. So certainly the poor districts, if you will, get more money than the wealthier districts. That's why you see some of the East Grand Rapids and the Forest Hills having lower amounts. So that's, I don't know, Ron, anything else to add to the ESSER update at this point? Okay, thanks. So that's where we stand. We'll continue to keep you updated, only as a committee as well as a full board as we move forward here and start spending down that money, which we have already, quite frankly. So, any questions on that?
Well, I'm just wondering, and it probably is not in your wheelhouse, but it would be interesting for you guys to study what that breakdown is going to look like for each of our schools in terms of learning loss. So Burton's learning loss, I'm thinking Union's learning loss, and so forth. I'm not sure if that's applicable, but I'm wondering if, and perhaps it's through our education committee and so forth, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's outside of finance's wheelhouse. I know, I mean, I've asked that question all along. I've not been academic, how we're going to assess that, and as I mentioned, I think at the work session again, we purchase in that Synergy additional software package that will better help us assess that and by individual student and track that. In fact, we just in cabinet today, again, we're just had a brief discussion with Ron Gorman, who's team leader of the academic team talking about, you may recall some of our ESSER spending in that arena also was providing additional resources during not just summer school, which we've expanded, but during some of the other break areas like winter break and like spring break. And they working on a plan, fleshing that out right now.
And conversations with our parents in terms of, you know, I'm sure as a parent specifically, if I had my kid at, and I always, you know, pounce on Burton, but to see how is my district going to help my kid, you know, and I'm sure you're thinking likewise, and wanting to see how that learning loss is going to be applied specifically to our schools, which, you know, translate to our students and then our families, and just those kinds of conversations so that parents can have good conversations with their principals about how are we as a school, specific school, addressing these things, and then work at those pieces, obviously, with this great opportunity in terms of the finances. So
This must have been an ongoing enormous amount of extra work and learning. So it's like, so I appreciate all that. And I think that, I don't know how those numbers are distributed in terms of it, but I imagine that it required a whole bunch of people making the case for our students, and I appreciate that.
And again, we have changing dynamics. We got last week, we got a somewhat, I'm going to say, ominous email from a gentleman at MDU, who's kind of the point person for on all things ESSER, essentially saying, especially for ESSER 3, they are going to be looking very hard at all of us and how we're spending the money to make sure we are in fact spending it according to what we have in our application and what's allowed by the law. More, not that ESSER 1 and 2 they're going to ignore, they're not, but ESSER 3, because it's so much more money and so many more requirements, they basically said you better be sure you're doing it right, because we're going to be watching you. So, in fact, Rhonda and I have, you know, that's likely going to change some of the conversations we've had. Because, you know, I don't know if I necessarily mentioned it on that public session, but, you know, there's some spending areas in there. Again, we're still getting some additional guidance that may be more in the gray area than certainly more in the gray area than other areas. And so we're going to go back and revisit those just to make sure that we think, and again, given the 3-year, well, 2.5-year time frame here, to spend it, you know, things are going to change about that time. I will mention, because this was a clarification that I didn't mention yet, we've been talking all along, ESSER 1 had until September 30th of next year to spend ESSER 2 2023, ESSER 3 September of 2024. We found clarification on that is that's when the state has to report. So basically, our spending deadline is some period before that. The state has to have all the information from us to be able to report to the feds by the end of September of those years what it looks like. The state hasn't determined what that timeline is. So internally, we've been, instead of September, we're talking more like June.
Wow.
Could be earlier, I don't know, but it's not going to be September of each of those respective years. So we've kind of now condensed that timeline we were talking about, and so we continue to move quicker where we can on some things, but it's always a work in process. And Rhonda has this huge spreadsheet with multiple tabs trying to keep with all these programs in the last 18 months on there, because again, you know, we're mixing and matching, and based on how the spending goes, we may have to move one from one spending bucket to another because we didn't spend it the timeline we thought we were going to, for whatever reason remains to be. So it's a challenge, as we're all finding that out. I get constant listserv, constant traffic every day on ESSER 3 in particular. So that's all I have. Chairman Matias.
great. Any other clarifications or questions again, we appreciate the depth. There is a lot of work to be done, and hopefully our district team is excited about that, and for our kids too, a tremendous opportunity to make up that loss and hopefully excel as well because of the wise minds that we have. So really appreciate that. Thank you. We are adjourned.